So I want to talk about the stuff we're doing at the Institute of Making at UCL on this topic of plastic. I wanted to reiterate what some of the other speakers have said about plastic, which is that it's a material that is so valuable to us that we're crazy to be throwing it away all this time. And in fact, I mean, many people don't realize that although it now represents an ecological disaster for us in terms of the way that we're polluting the oceans and the ecosystems, it was invented to be the solution for an ecological disaster. So in the 19th century, there was a big growth in the middle classes in America and Europe, and the growth of that wealth meant that people wanted more stuff, and they wanted more buttons, and they wanted more hair grips, and they wanted more brushes. And at the time, that stuff was built of things like turtle shell and ivory, and those animals were getting basically killed to the extent that they were going to be made extinct. And so there was a big competition to try and create a synthetic version that could be used for buttons and for brushes and all sorts of things that people wanted in their lives. And that's when celluloid came along, was invented, and it was then taken up as a material for buttons and all sorts of things, and for dentistry it turned out as implants. And then it started out on a different life. It became this material for photography and for photographs, and then of course the motion picture industry. So the celluloid itself, a whole new way of a visual culture came out of that search to help the elephants and the turtles. So. And then people fell in love with plastic, and many, many different types of plastic were invented, Bakelite and all sorts of different plastics. And in the early 20th century was this huge falling in love with this material, and modernity, in a sense, was kind of defined by it. So you had radios, we had TVs, we had the cinema, we had our lives full of plastic, and that's the history of the 20th century. And then so it's so interwoven with our own culture, what we think of as ourselves. That's, I think, part of the problem at the moment is there's a sort of double. On the one hand, people hate throwing plastic away and they hate what it's become, but it's so part of us that it's kind of becoming hating ourselves. And I think that's the dangerous bit here. We need to kind of work out how to kind of go full circle. But one of the things that happened in the 1960s that the plastic industry wanted to grow even further, and they thought of a way to do it was to make things disposable. And before that, a cup, or a fork or a spoon, these things weren't disposable. These things were made of metal or ceramic or wood, and people didn't dispose of them. They were valuable. Why would you get rid of something? Why would you have a dinner or a lunch for your colleagues and give them disposable things? That would be ridiculous. But the plastic industry, they lobbied American Congress to be allowed to make plastic that was so cheap it was disposable, and in the end they were given permission. And at that point, disposable plastics came into being. And it's also the time where you get the growth of takeaway food. So takeaway wrappings, all of the growth of the takeaway culture, the disposable culture. We had to be taught to be disposable. We weren't a disposable culture at that point. And waste grew at the same time, and it became a business. And so it was there was a growth of the waste business, and there was also a growth of disposable. It was like win-win for business. But we're complacent in that, right? Because we accepted that. And today, even now, we have cups we take around with us. I have one. Many of you here have a cup you have in your bag. It seems like a kind of peculiar thing to have to carry around a cup, but it's because we don't trust organizations anymore to not dispose of stuff or to give us stuff to dispose. It's a kind of protest. So what can we do about this? And I suppose my main message is that all of us have to be activists in this. And we have to be both personal activists, i.e. don't buy a drink in a disposable cup. Just refuse. And bring a cup with you until we get to the point where all cups are recycled. We all have to really stand up to this, because we have to unlearn to be disposable as a society. But also, I think in my job, in your job, in all of our jobs, we have other responsibilities which we can enact. So, if you're ordering a lunch for all your colleagues, or you're actually ordering carpet or you're designing a whole building. You know, all of us here have those moments where we can say, hold on a minute, this is not a sustainable use of this material. I feel we shouldn't be doing this. And I think if we all stood up at every part of our lives in all our responsibilities and said this, we would have a big difference. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of 3 parts of a project that we're doing at UCL, just to kind of, well, partly because I want help from you all, and it's a great opportunity, a very expert audience. So there's sort of 3 things that we're looking at. One is the idea of food waste. So the thing about giving up plastic, and I'm telling you to be an activist, but then am I really telling you to go into a supermarket and not buy any disposable plastic? Well, it's virtually impossible. You'll have to change your life so much, and maybe you live in a place or you'll have a lifestyle that's impossible to make that happen, or you feel it's impossible. But if you think about what plastic is doing for us, it is saving a lot of food waste, as previous speakers have outlined. And so throwing away the plastic at the supermarket, as some people are doing, I don't think is helpful because you're basically throwing away the protection for your food that will make it last a lot longer in your home. And if you then have more food waste, that's going to increase CO2 emissions. So what you don't, I think, need to be doing is doing that. But when you think about your kitchen and the whole thing about throwing away food and plastic and trying to divide it, you have to look at it and think, well, look, the cooker has changed a lot in the last 30 to 40 years. And the way that we wash cups and saucers, that's changed a lot. We have dishwashers. And but the bin hasn't really changed. I mean, it's up to you, isn't it, to kind of work out which plastics are recyclable and which materials are recyclable. And it's an incredibly complex thing to ask you to do. So what we need to do is redesign the bin. I mean, one of the first things we need to be able to do is help us all, make that difference. Because by dividing the materials that come through your hands, you make a huge difference by actually recycling. So that's project number 1, which is the redesign of the bin in our homes. And I foresee the future as the bin as being a white good, just like a washing machine or a fridge, but it will earn you money. You will put your waste in it, and it will reprocess it for you and sort it for you, and you will be able to sell that onwards. And I personally think that that's the future of the bin, and that in 10 or 20 years' time, you will buy a white good that is a recycling bin, which will earn you money and maybe even generate electricity in your home. The second thing I wanted to talk about is this business about trying to persuade the big companies who have all the power to change the way they use packaging. Now, one topic is worth talking about on this, because I've been pushing on this, is that if all of the bottles of detergent and washing up liquid and all these things you buy that come into your home, if they were all built with the same material, let's say polypropylene, we've just been hearing about it, and they were all white, right? White polypropylene. The market for recycled polypropylene would be really high because all of your stuff would be in it. You'd be able to tell it was recyclable because it would be white and polypropylene, and you can tell that material. And so there would be an enormous amount of content coming through the system. And then, of course, all the companies would be using the same material, so they would all be using it as a feedstock. So the circular economy would really work. But if you ask those companies all right, could we all just use white polypropylene for these goods, they'll push back really hard. And they push back on the grounds that you don't want it, that you like the brands to be distinctive. And when I question them on that, there's no way that they will discuss it, because their profits and also, I mean, their livelihoods, I can understand that, you know, people who work in those companies, their livelihoods are at stake. So you need to buy, we all need to buy, and we need to send the message that we are not so wedded to brand look. We're not. We're happy if you're going to use the same plastic. Because if you don't send that message to them by buying the goods that they make in that way, they can continue down the line of having 40 different washing up liquids, which are essentially all the same thing. The only difference is the packaging, and because it's different, it's unrecyclable. So this is a very bad thing. So we need, as a society, to persuade all the manufacturers that we actually want a single plastic and a single color. I know that's a lot to do, but we can do it. And then I've got to stop, haven't I? But the third thing I wanted to talk about is behavior change in terms of the way that we as a society pick up plastic and deposit in bins. You see a lot of social media, a lot of people are on social media, they're quite happy to post things like on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. But if we were to become activists in terms of plastic waste, and we were to post those on Twitter and Facebook every time we see it, and we were to hashtag one single hashtag, the wealth of information that would flood those media would be enormous. I think you'd have a huge impact, and the brands are on them. The brands are there, and that is your biggest power. That's as a society, our biggest power. So we can shame the brands that end up in the environment. It's really easy. We have it in our pockets. Most people have the ability to do it. And I think we need to go down that route, and we'll be leading the way on that at UCL. So tune in for more about that.